The ghosts arrived first. That was what Harry remembered most in the days that followed, not the castle rearing out of the dark, not the black water of the lake with its 1,000 reflected stars. He remembered the ghosts, silver and quietly luminous, drifting through the stone walls with the casual confidence of people who had died centuries ago and found the experience less final than expected. One of them, a broad, cheerful monk, laughed at something his companion said. Harry had spent 10 years at 4 Privet Drive, where the most unusual thing that happened was a neighbour's cat on the wrong fence. He was reconsidering his definition of unusual. Professor McGonagall led them into a stone antechamber off the entrance hall and left them with an instruction to wait, and the manner of someone who gave instructions once and trusted the world to comply. She was tall and angular, robes the deep green of good wool, and she looked at the assembled first years as though she had already catalogued each of them. Harry felt catalogued. He stood near the back, close enough to the wall to feel the cold radiating off it. He had spent 10 years locating the edges of rooms. Old habit. She returned and explained the houses. She had a voice that did not require volume to carry. 4 houses, Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw, Slytherin, each with a history, a reputation, a ghost, a head. She said it was an honor to be sorted. She said it the way people state facts. They do not feel need dressing up. The doors to the great hall opened. The ceiling was not what Harry had expected, though he couldn't have said what he'd expected. It showed the night sky the way a window shows the outside, black velvet scattered with stars, and the candles below it floated in long formations without anything holding them. The 4 house tables were set and waiting. At the high staff table at the far end, Harry recognized one face he had read about. Albus Dumbledore, silver-haired and silver-bearded, with half-moon spectacles and a quality of occupying space differently from the people around him, as though he had more time. The Sorting Hat sat on a 3-legged stool at the front of the hall, ancient and patched and alive. It creaked open at the brim and sang. Harry listened carefully, the way he listened to most new things. The hat described 4 houses, each in its own voice. For Slytherin the words were cunning, and any means to achieve their ends, and the hall went quiet in the particular way of 400 people deciding not to show their feelings about a single sentence. Harry had heard about Slytherin. Hagrid, warm and enormous, the first person to ever tell him the truth about his parents, had said it plainly in the leaky cauldron. There wasn't a witch or wizard gone bad who wasn't in Slytherin. He'd said it with concern in his voice, which was what made it worse, because it meant he was warning Harry rather than judging. Harry had tried not to carry the warning as a verdict. He was not entirely sure he had succeeded. McGonagall unrolled her scroll. Names were called. One by one, the first years walked to the stool, sat, received the hat over their heads, waited for the verdict. Harry watched Draco Malfoy, pale, pointed face, the boy from Madame Malkin's, receive Slytherin after approximately 2 seconds, which surprised no one. He watched Hermione Granger receive Gryffindor with the contained satisfaction of someone who had ranked all 4 options. He watched Ron Weasley receive Gryffindor too, and Ron looked across the hall at Harry and raised a small, uncertain hand, and Harry lifted a hand in return. They were still on speaking terms. Nothing had been decided yet. Greengrass, Daphne. She walked to the stool without hurry. She sat. The hat settled over her head and was still for 3 or 4 seconds, less than most, and then announced Slytherin, and the Slytherin table applauded, and she crossed to the far right and sat down and arranged herself, and was still. She did not look around the hall to see who was watching. Then McGonagall said, "Potter, Harry," and the hall changed. It didn't get louder. It got denser, a wave of attention, that moved through every table and the staff table alike, the particular quality of a room orienting itself toward a name it knew. Harry walked to the stool and sat, and McGonagall lowered the hat over his head, and the brim dropped past his eyes, and the great hall went away. The hat's voice was dry and private and unhurried. It sounded like someone who had been doing this for centuries and found it continuously interesting. Plenty of courage, I see. Not a bad mind, either. Talent, yes, there is real talent in here, and a nice thirst to prove yourself. Now that is interesting. Harry sat very still. So, said the hat, where shall I put you? He had expected to feel a pull toward Gryffindor. Everyone had already arranged him there, in the way the world arranges things before you arrive. Ron, Hagrid, the entire cultural architecture of everything he'd been told. The brave ones went to Gryffindor. He had spent 10 years in other people's houses, wondering in private whether he was one of the brave ones or something else, and he had never been sure. Slytherin, said the hat, considering. You could be great, you know. It's all here in your head. Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness. No doubt about that. The hat paused, waiting. This was the moment. He could feel it the way you feel the precise edge of a decision. The refusal was right there, small and well-worn as a habit. Not Slytherin. The hat would concede. He would go to Gryffindor. Nothing Hagrid had warned him about would happen. He thought about the word prove. A nice thirst to prove yourself. The hat had found it and named it without judgment, as though it were simply a quality rather than the embarrassing thing it felt like. The need of a boy who had been invisible for 10 years and was possibly overcompensating. No one had ever looked at that part of him and not called it a flaw. He did not say, not Slytherin. The hat announced Slytherin in a voice that rang off every stone surface in the hall. The sound that moved through the great hall was not silence. It was something denser. The sound of 400 people recalibrating at once. The applause from the Slytherin table coming in before everyone else had decided what to do with their hands. Harry lifted the hat from his head. He stood from the stool. He was aware of his own pulse. He walked to the Slytherin table, and the applause from that table was genuine and complicated, and from the rest of the hall it was polite, in the way of people being polite about something they hadn't prepared for. He sat down across from the girl who had been sorted 20 minutes before him. She looked at him, grey eyes, composed face, the quality of someone managing their expression with deliberate care, and reached into her robes and placed something on the table between them. A ring, silver, plainly made. She said nothing. Around them, the Slytherin table had gone quiet in a focused way that suggested everyone at it had known this moment was coming. Harry looked at the ring. He looked at her. He was 11 years old. He had spent a decade being told no one wanted him at the table. He had just sat under a hat and refused to refuse something. He picked up the ring, and the great hall erupted. The noise was immediate and layered, and Harry did not try to pass it. He placed the ring on his finger and sat back and tilted his head and looked at the enchanted ceiling, black velvet scattered with stars, entirely indifferent to what had just happened beneath it, and thought, with a clarity that surprised him. Well, that was one decision made. At the high staff table, Albus Dumbledore sat with his fingers lightly pressed together, and his half-moon spectacles reflecting the candlelight, and he was very still. His expression was the carefully neutral face of a man watching a thing he had not predicted occur. He was thinking forward through its implications, with the quiet, total attention of someone for whom surprises were not disorienting, but were, instead, the most valuable data available. The feast appeared in the dishes in front of him. He did not touch any of it for a long time. He still had the ring on. That was the first thing Harry registered when he woke. Not the greenish half-light filtering through the windows, not the low stone ceiling close above him, not the faint, persistent cold of the dungeon seeping through the bedclothes. He registered the ring. It was still there on his right hand, narrow and plain, and he lay looking at it in the strange underwater light of the Slytherin dormitory, and could not, with any precision, explain why he hadn't taken it off before sleeping. He had thought about it. He remembered thinking about it. And then he had not. The light through the dormitory windows was greenish and dim, the lake pressing its weight against the glass somewhere above or below or beside. Harry was not yet sure of the geometry. The stone walls were silver and green where the light touched them. Everything about this room felt like being inside something that had not been designed with comfort in mind, which was, he thought, at least familiar. Crabbe and Goyle were already sitting up in their beds watching him. Goyle with no particular expression, Crabbe with slightly more. Across the room, Draco Malfoy sat in the only chair, fully dressed, regarding Harry with the expression of someone who had been given an unexpected gift and was doing a slow, careful assessment of whether it was real. Harry sat up. He looked back at Draco. He had nothing to offer yet, except his own steadiness, so he offered that. In the common room before breakfast, Draco cornered him. He had the gift of making corners appear where there weren't any. Suddenly there were only two of them standing in the green-lit dungeon room with its silver and dark colour scheme, and Draco's question was as blunt as it was direct. Did Harry know what the Greengrass family was? He did not. Draco told him, without warmth. The Greengrasses were Sacred 28, one of the genuinely pure-blood families listed in the old pure-blood directory, one of 28 names that had survived into the modern wizarding world with their bloodline intact. It was old money and old magic and old alliances, and the ring Harry had accepted in front of the entire school last night meant something in these circles that it did not mean in whatever world Harry had come from. Harry had come from a cupboard under the stairs, and a school where no one had been especially interested in his bloodline. But he did not say this. He said nothing. He held Draco's gaze, grey eyes, sharp and assessing, and gave him nothing. The ring sat on his finger. Later, walking to his first class, Harry found himself in a corridor that turned out not to be empty. Daphne Greengrass had been waiting there, or had arrived there at the same moment, or had engineered the crossing. Harry could not tell which, and suspected the answer was the third option. She fell into step beside him without preamble. She had a quality of moving through spaces as though she owned them, not through arrogance, but through preparation. She had clearly already learned the castle's corridors when other first years were still losing themselves in them. Her tone was even. Measured, she might have said, if she'd been describing it herself. She explained the betrothal arrangement the way a solicitor explains a contract, its terms, its origins, its practical implications. The ring was a pure blood tradition, she said, old enough that most people in the school had at least heard of it. Her family had arranged it. She was not telling him because she owed him the truth. She was telling him because an ignorant partner was a liability, and she had no interest in managing a liability. Harry listened. He had spent 10 years learning to listen carefully to people who were explaining things to him in voices that meant they held the power and he did not. So he heard both what she said and what she didn't. She had not said, "I chose this." She had not said, "I wanted this." She had said her family had arranged it, and she had said it without any feeling about the fact in either direction, and he found that particular absence of feeling more interesting than anything she'd actually explained. He asked why him. She looked at him, briefly, with those grey eyes. She said the Greengrass family was prepared to invest in Harry Potter's future. This was not, she said, precisely a gift. She walked ahead of him and left him standing in the corridor with the ring on his finger and the word invest sitting in his chest like a stone dropped into still water. Potions was at 11 o'clock, in a dungeon classroom 1 level below the common room. Harry had been in the classroom for perhaps 3 minutes when the door opened and Professor Snape came in. He was not what Harry had expected, which was beginning to feel like the theme of his life. He was tall and thin, dressed in black from collar to hem, with dark hair that fell to his jaw and a face that was all angles and control. He moved through the classroom without looking at anything, which was a particular kind of looking, the kind that takes in everything without offering any sign that it has. He set down his materials. He turned to face the class. His gaze moved across the first years with the practiced efficiency of someone taking attendance without a list. When it reached Harry, it stayed 1 beat longer than it had anywhere else. In Snape's brief interior, green eyes, Lily Evans's green eyes, set in a face that was otherwise entirely and specifically not hers, the untidy dark hair, the glasses, the jawline that had no business being in this room, and was anyway here and was going to be here for 7 years, because Albus Dumbledore had decided the sorting was final, and Snape was going to teach this boy potions. He looked at Harry Potter, and he saw Lily's eyes, and he thought, with the cold clarity of someone who has been preparing for an unbearable thing and is now discovering that preparation is not the same as readiness. Right then, he looked away. He began the lesson. He did not call on Harry. He did not single him out. Not to praise, not to humiliate, not to perform any of the things Harry had braced for, based on everything Hagrid had said about Snape in the leaky cauldron. He asked questions of the class and waited for whoever answered. He corrected mistakes without theatrics. He taught. Harry sat at his bench and took notes and waited for the other shoe to drop, and it did not. On the way to the afternoon's transfiguration lesson, Harry turned a corner and nearly walked into someone. Ron Weasley caught himself against the wall. He had that particular expression of the very tall person who has not yet grown into their arms. And he was wearing Gryffindor red and gold, and the corridor that had felt crowded a moment before seemed to empty very quickly around the two of them. They stood there. On the Hogwarts Express, they had shared a compartment for 6 hours, talked until the light changed outside the windows, eaten most of a trolley between them. Harry could still locate the exact moment Ron had offered him the chocolate frog without being asked, and Harry had understood, for the first time in 10 years, that someone was offering him something for no reason except wanting to. That had been yesterday. It felt like a considerable distance from here. Ron looked at him. Then he looked at the Slytherin crest on Harry's robes. Then, with the bluntness of someone who has not yet learned that being honest and being tactful can sometimes both be true, he said, "You're really in Slytherin, then?" "Yes," Harry said. Ron nodded. His gaze had found the ring and stayed there. Harry watched him process it, could see something moving through his face that had to do with older brothers and things overheard at the dinner table, and a particular context Harry didn't yet have the vocabulary for. Ron didn't say any of it. He was 11 years old, and he wasn't unkind. But his face did the work. His voice was too good to do. They went their separate ways. Harry did not look back. He walked toward Transfiguration with the ring on his finger and the faint greenish light of the dungeon still behind his eyes. And he thought of the word arrangement. And he thought of the word invest. And he thought of a boy in a chair studying him the way you study a thing you've been handed unexpectedly, trying to work out its value. He had spent 10 years being studied in doorways and across dinner tables, and none of those studies had ever concluded that he was worth much. He was beginning to suspect that Slytherin operated on different ledgers. By the second week, Harry had begun to understand that Slytherin operated the way certain other closed systems did. Boarding school dormitories, small offices, lifeboat situations, where proximity eventually forced a kind of honesty that politeness would otherwise have postponed indefinitely. It was a Thursday evening when Draco sat beside him. The common room was quiet. Crabbe and Goyle occupying the far end of a sofa, with the contented vacancy of large dogs who had found a warm spot, a cluster of third years arguing over a transfiguration essay near the fire, the greenish light of the lake pressing steadily against the windows. Draco settled into the chair beside Harry's, as though arriving at an appointment, and said, without preamble, "Alliances matter in this house." Harry put down his quill. He waited. "Your name means something," Draco said. "My name means something. Together they mean considerably more." He said it with the ease of someone presenting a mathematical truth, not a proposition, as though the conclusion had already been reached, and they were only reviewing the working. Harry listened for the thing underneath the presentation. He had grown up in houses where adults said things and meant other things, and the gap between the two was usually where the actual information lived. The speech had been prepared, not poorly, Draco was clearly intelligent, but prepared in the way of something rehearsed from a position of advantage, without much genuine uncertainty about how it would land. Harry had spent 10 years learning to hear the gap between what adults said and what they meant. He heard it now. He said, "I'll think about it." Draco looked at him. Something shifted slightly in those grey eyes. Not irritation exactly, but a recalibration, the expression of someone who had prepared for yes or for no, and had received instead a third option. "All right," Draco said, and left him alone. Later, after the common room had mostly emptied, Harry heard the scratch of a quill. Draco sat alone at a writing desk, composing a letter with his posture perfect and deliberate. He sealed it with wax, and for a moment, before he reached for the next sheet of parchment, something moved across his face that was not the expression of someone executing a strategy. Then he looked down, and it was gone. The Bloody Baron arrived on a Friday. He drifted through the common room wall without warning, trailing chains that did not clink. They moved in silence, which Harry found considerably worse than if they had made noise. The effect on the room was immediate. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. A third year knocked over her inkwell and did not curse about it. Pansy Parkinson went still beside Millicent Bulstrode, and her eyes cut sideways to Harry, the way eyes cut sideways when checking how someone is reacting to a thing. Harry kept his face as neutral as he could, and watched the Baron pass. The ghost was tall and spectral, and wearing what had once been fine robes, now stained with something that had dried silver and ancient. He moved through the room looking at nothing. He looked at nothing the way someone looks at nothing when they have seen everything and found it insufficient. Then he was through the far wall and gone, and the room exhaled. Harry asked Daphne later who he was. They were in the corridor outside the common room, in the particular kind of proximity that was less a choice than a consequence of walking in the same direction. She said, without looking at him, "The Bloody Baron. Slytherin's ghost. He had murdered someone for love and then killed himself in remorse, and the chains were his self-imposed punishment, and that was all anyone knew." She said it the way you say something that has a clear beginning and a clear end and requires no further discussion. Harry thought about it through dinner and through the walk back. He thought, "That is a terrible story." He thought, I wonder if he knew he was going to do it, or if it happened, and then it was already done. He fell asleep with the lake pressing its cold green weight against the windows. Hagrid's invitation arrived on a Saturday morning, written in handwriting that was large enough to be read from the other end of the table and enthusiastic enough to make the ink blot in 2 places. Harry read it twice and went. The hut sat at the edge of the grounds, where the forbidden forest began its first serious trees. Harry knocked. The door opened, and the smell of something baking rolled over him, and Hagrid, broad enough in the doorway to block the sky, looked down at Harry with a smile that faltered only slightly when it reached the robes. The smile recovered. It was a good recovery, but Harry had grown up reading recoveries. They sat on either side of the enormous table, with tea that could have stripped paint and rock cakes that Harry ate anyway. Hagrid talked about classes, the castle, the creatures in the forest. Harry let him. He was watching Hagrid's face, the way he watched faces that were trying not to say something. The careful selection of subjects, the way the eyes slid away from the robes each time they finished moving back. Eventually, after a silence that had gotten a little too deliberate, Hagrid said, "You doing all right, then?" "Really?" "Yes," Harry said. Another silence. "Only," Hagrid said. "Slytherins, well." He stopped. He pressed his enormous hands flat on the table and looked at them. "There's not a single witch or wizard who went bad who wasn't in Slytherin," he said, very quietly, as though saying it quietly would make it less the thing he had said to Harry in the leaky cauldron less than 3 months ago. "I'm not saying you. I just want you to know I'm here. If anything—" "I might change that," Harry said. He had not planned to say it. It came out more sharply than he intended, more fiercely, with an edge that surprised them both. Hagrid blinked. Harry felt the blood in his face, and kept his voice steady anyway, and said it again, slightly more evenly. "I might change it. What it means." Hagrid looked at him for a long moment. Then, very slowly, he smiled. Not the recovered smile from the doorway, but a real one, the kind that reached his eyes and had no calculations behind it. He did not say he believed Harry. He did not say he was certain. But he passed the plate of rock cakes back across the table, and Harry took one, and neither of them needed to say anything else about it. He found Daphne in the library on Sunday. She was at a table near the back, with 3 books open in front of her, arranged in an order that seemed deliberate, and she did not look up when Harry sat down across from her. She waited for him to say something. He took his time. "Why me?" he said. She turned a page. "Specifically, of everyone at this school." He had thought about how to ask it all the way from the common room. He had decided not to hedge. "Your family could have chosen anyone. There are older students, pure-blood students, students whose names don't come with complications. Why Harry Potter?" She put the book down. She looked at him in the way she occasionally looked at him. That even, grey-eyed regard that offered nothing. Then she said, "The Greengrass family is old enough to understand that power is not always where it appears to be. We believe Harry Potter will be powerful." Harry said, "That is not an answer." She picked the book back up. He sat there for another 20 minutes, doing his own reading, and she did not speak again. And when he left, she did not watch him go. He could tell she didn't watch him go, because he checked. The house politics revealed themselves in smaller ways after that. Pansy Parkinson had a gift for the remark that contained a weapon only if you knew where to look for it. She did not direct them at Harry. He was Harry Potter, and even Pansy understood the calculation there. But she directed them at the space that Harry occupied in relation to Daphne, with the precision of someone who had mapped that space carefully and found it grievously overcrowded. "Some families," Pansy said one evening, to no one in particular but to everyone in earshot, have always understood that the best arrangements are made with the right kind of patience. She was looking at her nails. Millicent Bulstrode said nothing, which was its own kind of agreement. Harry did not know enough yet to read the full weight of it, but he understood enough to know that Daphne had done something, the night of the sorting, that was visible to everyone in this house as a move, and that some of those people thought it had been hers to make, and some thought it hadn't, and that he was the territory the argument was being conducted over without his permission. He thought about the word powerful. He thought about the word arrangement. He thought, not for the first time, about the word greatness, and how it had sounded in the sorting hat's voice, and how much of him had wanted it, even before he knew what wanting it would cost. October arrived cold and smelling of lake water, and Harry arrived at his first defense against the dark arts class, with the particular wariness of someone who has been told a subject is dangerous by a man who considers flobberworms thrilling. The classroom was on the 3rd floor, which Harry had been to twice now for reasons he was keeping to himself, and the professor was already at the front when they filed in. A slight, pale man in a purple turban that he adjusted as he turned to face them, the motion quick and habitual, the hands already trembling slightly before anyone had said a word. Professor Quirrell. Harry had seen him at the staff table at meals, always towards the end, always leaving early, and had thought, that man is frightened of something. He thought it again now, watching him prepare to teach a class about dark magic with the demeanor of someone who had recently encountered some. The lesson began. Quirrell stuttered through an introduction to counter-jinxes, pausing at intervals to adjust the turban, to look at the window, to look at nothing in particular with the expression of someone listening for something the rest of the room couldn't hear. Harry took notes. He was watching Quirrell the way he had always watched adults who were hiding things, the gap between the performance and the person performing it, the places where the surface didn't quite match the interior. Then the door swung shut behind a late student, and Harry's scar exploded. Not exploded. That was too large a word for it. It spiked, a sharp, sudden pain above his right eye, precise as a splinter, driven in, there and gone, inside of 3 seconds. He pressed 2 fingers against his forehead. He breathed in through his nose. He looked down at his parchment. When he looked up, Quirrell had gone still at the front of the classroom, hands at his sides, facing the window. Then he turned back to the class and continued the lesson as though nothing had interrupted it, which was exactly what Harry had done, and Harry found this more unsettling than the pain had been. He did not rub his forehead again. The scar did not flare again. The lesson ended with a list of counter-jinxes to memorize, and Harry walked out into the corridor with the knowledge that something in that classroom had caused him pain and the strong instinct that this information belonged entirely to him until he understood it better. He ran through the list, walking back to the dungeons. Daphne. She would treat it as information, to be filed and potentially leveraged. Draco. He would either dismiss it as a bid for attention or treat it as a liability, and Harry couldn't afford either. Snape. He could not begin to construct the sentence. The thought of sitting in Snape's office, the jars of preserved things, the silence, that particular quality of being assessed, and saying, "Sir, my scar hurts when I'm near the Dada professor," was not a thought he could finish. He wrote it in no letter. He told no one. He had learned this particular discipline at 4 Privet Drive, where the things you said aloud had a way of becoming things that were used against you, or things that were disbelieved with an efficiency that made you feel worse than the original problem. He had spent 10 years keeping his own inventory and consulting no one. He was 11 years old, and he saw no reason, yet, to change the practice. That evening in the common room, he sat with his potions assignment and pressed his fingers once against the place above his eye where the pain had been. He wasn't entirely aware he was doing it until he heard Daphne's voice from across the table. "What is it?" Not a question. An observation that required a response. He dropped his hand. "Nothing." She looked at him. He looked at the parchment. In the peripheral space between them, the one he was becoming better at reading, she sat very still for a moment, the way someone sits when they are deciding whether to press or let go. Then she went back to her work. It was brief, it was almost nothing, but it was the first time she had looked at him, without the calculation present behind the looking, and Harry noted it, the way he noted things he didn't understand, and stored carefully for later. He went to the library on Saturday. He went because he had potions reading to do, and because the common room had started to feel like a room where everyone was watching everyone else, which was something he was used to, but didn't especially enjoy when he was supposed to be thinking. Ron was already there. He was at a table in the middle section, which was the general use area where all 4 houses had an equal claim, and there was a Gryffindor crest on his robes, and a Slytherin crest on Harry's, and Ron looked at him, and didn't leave. This was the thing about Ron. He was fairly bad at concealing what he was feeling, and what he was feeling was clearly that things were complicated and awkward, and he didn't know what to do about them, but he also didn't seem to want to make them worse. Harry sat at his own table. After a few minutes' interval that felt deliberately casual, Ron slid into the chair beside him, with a charms textbook he pointedly did not open. "You know anything about chess?" Ron asked. Harry knew nothing about chess. He said so. Ron's face changed entirely. Harry had seen Ron look wary, seen him look unsure, seen him do the particular expression he made when he thought he was about to say something that would come out wrong. He had not yet seen this, the expression Ron made when talking about something he was genuinely brilliant at. The explanation was rapid and specific, and completely unhedged, the way expertise sounds when it's real. Harry listened and understood perhaps a third of it, and found that the third he understood was interesting, and found the overall experience of being sat next to someone who was simply talking to him, without an agenda visible from any angle, to be considerably more restoring than he could have predicted. Hermione Granger appeared at the end of his table with a potions textbook and the air of someone who had decided to do something despite the better judgment they'd been arguing with for some time. She said, "Is ground bicorn horn the same as powdered bicorn horn in a first-year preparation, or does the grinding change? The potency increases with finer grinding," Harry said. "But in first-year girding potion, the coarse grind is specified because the finer compound reacts with the second stage. Snape covered it in the 3rd lesson." She blinked. She had expected, he gathered, either wrong answer or no answer. She wrote something in the margin of her textbook. Then she sat down, which he had not expected, but he said nothing about it. They were not friends. None of that had happened yet. But for 20 minutes in the middle of the library, 3 first years at a table, did potions research and talked about it, and the crests on their robes were incidental. The evening returned Harry to the common room, and the common room returned Harry to Draco, who had the quality of materializing in comfortable chairs at exactly the moments when Harry had been hoping for 5 minutes of not being assessed. "I've been hearing things," Draco said, in the conversational tone he used when he was preparing to say something that was not conversational. "About your family." He paused. "Your mother was Muggle-born, wasn't she?" Harry said, "Yes." He watched Draco the way he always watched Draco now, noting what the face did with information. What it did was complicated. A thought moved through it that Harry couldn't fully read, something between satisfaction and the thing that exists just before satisfaction becomes a problem. The Greengrass family will have considered this, Draco said. He said it as a fact, carefully empty of judgment. Harry understood what it meant. He was a half-blood in a house built on the idea that blood was the measure of a person. He had accepted a betrothal ring from a sacred 28 family. At some point, these facts would stand in the same room and require an accounting. He said, "So was Voldemort." The word landed on the room the way a stone lands on glass. He didn't say, "You know who," or "He who must not be named." He said, "Voldemort," clearly and without hesitation, in a dungeon common room in the middle of Hogwarts, and the quality of the silence that followed was the quality of silence that follows something that cannot be unsaid. Draco stared at him. Across the room, Pansy Parkinson looked as though someone had briefly stopped her heart. Harry held Draco's gaze and did not say anything else, which was not nothing. The hat had called it a thirst to prove himself. He was beginning to understand what that meant in practice. It meant that there were things he would not be quiet about. Not in this room. Not in any room. And Slytherin was going to have to find a way to calculate for that. He picked up his potions assignment and went back to work. He woke, knowing it was the 31st. He did not know how. The Dursleys had never observed it, had never, in 10 years, said this is the day, or marked it in any way that acknowledged what had happened on it. October 31st had been the same as October 30th in that house, which was a deliberate absence rather than an accidental one, and Harry had noticed the deliberateness without knowing what to do with it. But he had always known the date. He had always, every year, woken on this morning, with the knowledge sitting in him like a stone, dropped into still water. Today. He got dressed, he went to breakfast, he looked at his porridge. The castle was full of Halloween decorations, bats that were not quite solid, floating in loose formations near the ceiling, and pumpkins the size of armchairs blazing in every corridor, and a general festive quality that Harry moved through with the specific numbness of someone watching a celebration through glass. He attended classes. He sat in his seat. He wrote what was asked of him. He answered correctly when called upon, which happened less in October than it had in September, as though the professors had calibrated to the fact that he was present and competent and did not require being sought out. He ate nothing at the feast. The great hall was warm and loud, with several hundred people who had not woken this morning with a stone in their chests. Harry ate nothing and watched the candles and thought, with a dull and honest curiosity, what his mother had looked like. He had a photograph, somewhere, the one Hagrid had given him, with figures too small to read closely. He had not taken it out in 2 weeks. He was not sure he would know how to look at it in this place. He went back to the common room early. The dungeon was quiet without most of the house at the feast, the lake pressing its dark green weight against the windows, no stars visible from this angle, just the shifting blackness of deep water and the occasional slow drift of something pale in the depths that Harry had decided, after 3 encounters, not to look at too closely. He sat in the chair nearest the windows and looked out at the dark water, and did not think of anything in particular, which was its own kind of thinking. He heard the door. Daphne came in from the corridor and stopped when she saw him. She had the quality, always, of assessing a room before committing to it, standing in the doorway for 1 beat, 2, and then coming in. She crossed to the chair beside his, the one closest to the window, and sat down in it without asking whether he wanted company. She did not ask what was wrong. She had learned, apparently, in the 6 weeks since the sorting, that asking produced nothing. They sat in silence. The lake moved outside the glass. After a long time, he could not have said how long, the fire had burned lower. Harry said They died 10 years ago tonight. He was not asking for anything. He was saying it because it was true, and he had spent all day not saying it. And the weight of a true thing, kept unsaid, accumulates over the course of a day, until the only reasonable action is to put it somewhere outside yourself. Daphne said, "I know who they were." She said it simply. She did not say she was sorry, which was the thing people said when they did not know what else to say, which Harry had learned at school from the way teachers looked at him after his headmistress had presumably said something to them. She said it as a statement of recognition. Your parents existed. I know of them. They were real people. She said it as though this were simply the relevant fact to offer. Harry turned his head to look at her. She was looking at the lake, her profile still and composed, and she was there in a way she hadn't been before. Not strategically present, not executing something. Just sitting beside him in a quiet room at the end of the worst day of his year, which she had not been required to do and had done anyway. He turned back to the window. The fire ticked behind them. Later, when the common room was entirely empty and the fire had been banked low, Harry got out parchment and his quill and wrote a letter to the headmaster. He had thought about how to ask it for weeks. He had drafted versions of it in his head during transfiguration, during meals, during the long, slow stretch of the evenings when the common room settled into its nighttime quiet. He had not been able to make it smaller than it was, so in the end, he wrote it directly. He wanted to know why the Sorting Hat had chosen Slytherin, not why it had offered it. He knew the words it had used. He wanted to know the reason underneath them. He called Hedwig down from the dormitory. She had taken to sleeping on the post of his bed, having determined that the dungeon windowsill was insufficient. And she settled on his arm with the dignified patience of a bird who knew she was going to be asked to do something and had already decided to do it gracefully. He had named her himself in the first week of August, sitting in his room at Privet Drive with the door closed, and it was still one of the better things he had done. He tied the letter to her leg. He opened the common room's high slit window to the night air, and she was gone. In the headmaster's tower, Albus Dumbledore read the letter twice. He sat with it for some time after, his hands folded on the desk, his half-moon spectacles reflecting the candlelight of his office. The silver instruments whispered and ticked around him. On his perch, Fawkes had tucked his head beneath one crimson wing and was not available for consultation, which Dumbledore found he did not particularly mind. He sat with the question Harry had asked, not the answer he would give, which had composed itself immediately, but the question itself, and found it to be exactly the right question, which confirmed his assessment that the boy was exactly as intelligent as everything in his record suggested. He wrote carefully. He said, "The Sorting Hat examines a person's character with a precision that no other instrument can match." He said, "It found qualities in Harry that it considered extraordinary, not merely adequate for one house or another, but exceptional in a way that pointed in a specific direction." He said, "The hat is very rarely wrong about where a person belongs. It is sometimes wrong about where they expect it to belong." He sealed the letter. He did not say what he was thinking, which was, the hat detected something else. Something that had been in that scar for 10 years, waiting. He did not name it to himself. Not here. Not yet. The name had implications that would require an entirely different kind of preparation before he could act on them. He placed the letter on the sending tray and extinguished his lamp and sat for a long moment in the dark. He permitted himself to think, briefly. The boy asked the right question. He has been asking right questions since the night of the sorting. Then he went to bed and did not sleep well, and the next morning was the 1st of November. Harry received the letter 3 days later, which was faster than he had expected. He read it at breakfast, twice, with the specific care he gave to things that were clearly saying less than they contained. The headmaster had told him the hat found exceptional qualities. The headmaster had told him the hat placed him where he belonged rather than where he expected to be. The headmaster had told him, in the space between those two sentences, essentially nothing about why. He put the letter in his trunk when he returned to the dormitory. He thought about it for the rest of the day. He thought, he is watching me, and he has decided I don't need to know what he knows yet. He thought, I understand that, actually. He thought, I don't like it. That evening, Daphne was already in the common room when he came down, and he sat across from her, and after a moment he said, What does your family expect from you? She looked up. Whatever she had expected him to open with, it was not that. She said, The Greengrass family has expectations of all its members. He waited. She looked at him with those grey eyes that gave nothing easily, and then she said, as though making a concession, I am the eldest. There are certain things that fall to the eldest. He said, I know something about expectations I didn't choose. The room was quiet. The lake pressed its weight against the glass. She looked at him for a moment with a quality he hadn't seen before on her face. Not calculation, not the composed distance she wore like good clothing. Something more careful and more real than either. She said, Yes, I expect you do. She went back to her reading. He went back to his, but the room felt different after that. Still quiet, still greenish, still theirs in the way that any space becomes yours after you've sat in it enough times, but different, like something had been very slightly moved. Not much. Enough. The Slytherin Quidditch captain was a 5th year named Flint, and he was conducting tryouts on the Saturday before the first match of the season with the air of a man who had already made his decisions and was permitting the process to confirm them. Harry watched from the edge of the grounds, hands in his robes against the November cold, and felt the brooms with some part of himself that operated below thought. He had been on a broom once, in the first week of term, a brief test McGonagall had conducted, which Harry had apparently made interesting enough that she had sent a note to Flint about it. The note had been politely received. Then nothing. Harry was 11, and first years didn't play, and Slytherin was not in the habit of rewriting its structures for one student's convenience. Draco appeared beside him, which had become Draco's preferred way of materializing, not walking up to Harry but simply being there, as if distance were a social convention he'd declined to observe. If you're on the team, Draco said, watching the tryouts with the expression of someone doing arithmetic, we win the cup. Is that certain? Harry said. You flew, Draco said. McGonagall sent a note. Flint knows. Harry watched a 5th year chaser overshoot the goalposts by a significant margin. He said nothing. The question of whether Slytherin would make an exception for him was still open, and he had found, in his first term here, that pushing open questions before they were ready produced fewer results than waiting for them to ripen. Draco accepted the silence as a kind of answer, which was one of Draco's more useful qualities. By the first week of December, the castle had emptied in that particular way of large buildings left to themselves. Most students went home. Harry did not. He had packed nothing, written no letter to Privet Drive, and performed the studied indifference of someone for whom this was a preference rather than an absence of options. He did not think much about little whinging. He was not sure he had thought about it very much since September, and he was not inclined to start. Daphne also stayed. He noticed her at breakfast on the first Saturday after term ended. The same chair at the Slytherin end of the table. The same 3 books, stacked in that deliberate order she kept. He did not ask why she hadn't gone home. She did not explain. They ate in a silence that had become, over the preceding weeks, a comfortable kind of thing rather than an empty one. The castle over Christmas was a different creature from the castle in term. The grounds were white, and the black lake was hard-edged with cold that stopped just short of freezing, and the enchanted ceiling of the great hall showed grey sky that moved as slowly as actual sky moves on a still, overcast day. The stone corridors had their own acoustics without several hundred students in them. Harry wandered them the way he wandered spaces when no one was watching him, which was a habit the Dursleys had trained into him, the systematic exploration of whatever room or building he was confined to, because knowing where everything was had always felt like safety. He found the mirror on the 4th night. He had taken a wrong turning somewhere above the 4th floor. The castle rearranged certain passages at night, and he was still learning which ones, and walked into a room he had no memory of. It was a long, high-ceilinged room, dimly lit, apparently used for storage, and at the far end stood something that was not storage. It was a mirror. Taller than any mirror had business being, elaborately framed in gold, and across the top of the frame ran a line of writing that Harry leaned in to read, and then didn't quite. His eyes grazed the letters without taking them in, and then he looked at the glass. He saw a room that was also this room. He saw himself, standing where he was standing, and behind him, around him, standing with the comfortable ease of people who had always been there, were people he had never met. A man with untidy black hair and glasses, very like his own, looking directly at him with an expression of such specific recognition that Harry's throat closed around whatever he had been about to breathe. A woman with dark red hair and a face Harry did not know but knew. The green eyes, his green eyes, the ones Snape looked at and then away from. They were standing beside him, as though this were normal, as though he had always been someone's son. He stood there for a long time. He came back the next night. He came back the night after that. On the 3rd night, Daphne was already there. She was standing in front of the mirror with her arms at her sides, and her posture exactly as composed as it always was, and her face was not composed at all. He had never seen her face like that. He stopped in the doorway, and she did not hear him, or heard him, and was too deep in whatever the mirror was showing her to turn. And he stood for a long moment, looking at the expression of someone who has been shown something true that they had not expected to be shown. Then she stepped back. He heard her breathe, her face reassembled, layer by layer, until it was the face he recognized. She turned. He said nothing. He waited. She said, "I found it 2 nights ago." Her voice was even. She had clearly decided, in the 3 seconds since she heard him, what she was going to do about his presence here, which was apparently to treat it as a fact rather than an intrusion. He came in because the alternative was leaving, and leaving felt wrong. He said, "What do you see?" She looked at him. Then she looked back at the mirror, not at the glass itself, but at the frame, the elaborately carved gold of it. She said, "Something I haven't decided what to do with yet." He stood beside her and looked. His parents were still there. James and Lily, behind him, recognizable in every way he had catalogued over 3 nights. He looked at them the way he always looked at them here, the man with his hair, the woman with his eyes, and let himself look until it hurt, the way looking at something very bright hurts. Then, at the edge, At the very edge of the image, where the reflection resolved into the shadows of the room behind, there was a figure standing beside him that was not his parents. He saw it for half a second. He looked away. He did not say what he had seen. She did not say what she had seen. They stood there for a while, side by side, in front of a mirror that reflected the room and two first-year students, and apparently things that neither of them was prepared to put into words. The fire in the grate behind them, which had apparently been burning all along, cast its light against the gold of the frame. Eventually she said, "We should go back," he said. "Yes." They walked back to the dungeon together in silence. It was the most comfortable silence they had shared since October. The note arrived on the last Tuesday before the new term, a small square of folded parchment with his name in a handwriting that was confident and slightly archaic, asking if Harry would come and see the headmaster at his convenience, which meant, Harry had learned, sometime in the next 24 hours. He went that evening. Dumbledore's office was at the top of a moving staircase, and it was not what Harry had expected, which he was used to by now. There were silver instruments on every surface, ticking and spinning in ways that suggested purpose without explaining it, and portraits of previous headmasters in frames around the walls, most of them apparently asleep. On a perch beside the window, a bird that was unambiguously a phoenix, crimson and gold, the colors of contained fire, regarded Harry with the patient intelligence of something that had been alive long enough to have made its peace with most things. Dumbledore sat behind his desk with his fingers loosely folded and his half-moon spectacles catching the lamplight, and he said, "How are you finding Slytherin, Harry?" Harry considered. Then he said, "Different from what I expected." "And what did you expect?" Harry looked at the phoenix. He said, "Something like what Hagrid described." Dumbledore's expression shifted in a way that was difficult to read. Kind, Harry thought, and something quieter underneath the kindness, something that might have been concerned, or might have been something he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. He said, "And is it?" "No," Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment, and did not say whether this was good or bad, because he never said whether things were good or bad, which Harry had now received twice by letter and once in person, and was beginning to recognize as his defining characteristic. He asked questions. He offered perspective, shaped like weather, the kind you couldn't argue with because it wasn't claiming anything. Harry found it maddening, and also, quietly, something like trustworthy. He went back to the dungeon with more questions than he'd arrived with, which he suspected was the point. The second term began on a Thursday, which felt like the wrong day for beginnings, and Dumbledore's office was at the top of a moving stone staircase that Harry took slowly, partly because he was not entirely sure it would stop moving if he rushed it. The door at the top was already open. The office was nothing like Harry had constructed in his head over the preceding weeks, which was surprising only in that he had not expected to have constructed anything. He had imagined something formal. What it was, instead, was a room that had clearly accumulated its contents over a very long period of time by a person who found everything interesting and had the space for it. Silver instruments on every surface, emitting thin streams of smoke or rotating in silent, purposeful orbits. Portraits of previous headmasters in frames around the walls, most of them asleep in the particular way of portraits that have been sleeping for decades and see no reason to stop. And on a perch by the window, a phoenix, crimson and gold, watching Harry with the tranquil attention of a creature that has been alive long enough to have seen most categories of visitor, and placed them without drama. Dumbledore sat behind his desk. He had the quality, which Harry had now observed 3 times, of having more time than anyone else in the room. Not in the way of patience, exactly, but in the way of someone for whom the present moment is sufficiently large that it does not need to be hurried through. He said, "I understand you found the mirror of Erist." He said it without accusation or particular concern, in the way of someone noting a fact that leads naturally to a conversation. Harry sat in the chair across from him and said, "Yes." "It is a remarkable object," Dumbledore said. "It shows us nothing more and nothing less than the deepest, most desperate desire of our hearts." He looked at Harry over the half-moon spectacles. "It does not do well to dwell on dreams and forget to live." He let this settle, then said, "What did you see?" Harry had thought, in the days since Christmas, about how to answer this if it was asked. He had thought about the various framings: partial truth, deflection, a version of the truth that contained enough to satisfy without giving everything. In the event, he said, "My parents." Dumbledore was quiet. Something in his face shifted. Not surprise, but the quality of something confirmed, a piece placed precisely where it was expected. He said, "You have a large heart, Harry." He did not say more about the mirror. He moved on with the efficiency of someone who has extracted exactly what he needed and is now ready for the next thing. He asked about the hat. "Tell me what it said to you," Dumbledore said. "In the Great Hall. You needn't recite it. I only ask what you remember." Harry remembered all of it with the clarity of something heard in absolute silence. He said it the way it had been. Plenty of courage. Not a bad mind. Talent, and a nice thirst to prove yourself. He paused, and then, "Slytherin will help you on the way to greatness." Dumbledore listened. He said, "And is that why you chose it? Greatness?" Harry thought about this with more honesty than he had given the question when he'd thought about it alone. He said, "I don't know. It wasn't the greatness exactly. It felt like—" He stopped, reassembled, tried again. "It was the first time I'd ever chosen anything for myself. In my whole life. Something that was mine." The office was very quiet. Outside the window, the January sky was the particular grey of a sky that had decided not to do anything definite. Dumbledore said, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." He said it with the specificity of someone offering something true, not something comfortable. Harry turned the sentence over. He did not ask what it meant that he had chosen Slytherin. He suspected that asking would produce another question in return. Dumbledore said, "And the ring?" Harry looked at his hands. The ring was there as it had always been. He had not taken it off since the sorting. Not once. Which he had stopped trying to explain to himself and had simply accepted as a fact about himself that he didn't yet have the full context for. He said, "I didn't plan it. I didn't know what it meant. I'm 11 years old." "You are," Dumbledore agreed. He looked at Harry thoughtfully. "The Greengrass family is very old. One of the oldest wizarding families currently practicing. They are what is called Sacred 28, pure blood lines that have survived intact into the present age." He folded his hands. "They acted quickly, and they acted in front of everyone. The wizarding world has been watching you since you were 1 year old, Harry. It watched the night your parents died, and it has not stopped watching since. This arrangement, if you maintain it, will tell certain families a great deal about who you intend to be." He did not say whether Harry should maintain it. He offered the information the way a map is offered. "Here is the terrain. Where you go in, it is your own business." Harry said, "You're not going to tell me what to do." "No," Dumbledore said. He seemed very briefly to find this amusing. Harry stood up. He had what he had come for, which was the sense, now confirmed in person rather than by letter, that Dumbledore was watching him with complete and specific attention, and that this was neither threat nor comfort, but simply the shape of the thing he was inside. He was at the door when he turned back. He had not planned to ask it. It arrived the way certain questions arrive, already fully formed, already necessary, impossible not to say, "Did Professor Snape know my mother?" Dumbledore was still, just for a moment. "He did," Dumbledore said. His voice was careful now in a different way than it had been. "They were friends once, a long time ago." He did not say more. Harry stood in the doorway and waited, and the more did not come, and he went down the moving staircase with the answer sitting in him exactly as something too small and too sharp sits in your hand when you've been handed it and have not yet decided how to hold it. He did not see Snape until the second-floor corridor. He was walking back toward the dungeon staircase when the door to the staff room opened ahead of him, and Snape came out, carrying a sheaf of parchment and moving with the particular quality of someone who has always walked as though the hallways belonged to him and has not found cause to revise this position. He was 32 years old as of 9 days ago, though Harry did not know this. He knew only what the term's worth of observation had assembled. Tall, black-robed, economical in everything, guarded in a specific way that was different from not caring. They saw each other at the same moment. Neither spoke. Harry went left. Snape went right. Snape walked the length of the corridor. He did not look back. He was practicing not looking back with the deliberateness of a skill that required maintenance. He had prepared for many things in the years before Harry Potter arrived at Hogwarts. He had prepared for James Potter's face on a boy who thought he was owed the world. He had prepared for arrogance, for recklessness, for the particular quality of someone who has been told their whole life they are exceptional and has started to believe it without earning it. He had prepared for the Gryffindor version of Harry Potter, the one the prophecy and the stories and the world had practically pre-assembled, and he had been ready, or something functionally adjacent to ready. He had not prepared for this. A Slytherin, his student, in his house, under his pastoral care, walking the corridors with Lily's eyes in James's face and asking questions Snape hadn't heard coming. He had not prepared for Harry Potter to look at him in a corridor, briefly, directly, without performance, and then simply go. He had been keeping a distance, not the cruelty he'd anticipated needing. Cruelty had its function, but it required the Gryffindor version, required contempt as armor, and contempt was not a thing he could construct for this particular student, not in this house, not with those eyes. Just distance, professionalism, the clean, maintainable geometry of a head of house doing his job without complication. He turned the corner at the end of the corridor. Of all the ways the world could have arranged itself, he thought, of all the possible configurations. He did not finish the thought. He went to his office, sat at his desk, and began marking. He was very good at marking. He had always been very good at things that kept his hands occupied. He did not look back. The letter arrived on a Tuesday with the Malfoy family's eagle owl and landed on Draco's plate with the air of something that did not expect to be kept waiting. Draco read it once. Then he set it face down on the table, ate the remainder of his toast, and read it again before folding it along its original crease and tucking it into his robe. Harry watched this. What Draco's face had done during the second reading was a thing Harry had catalogued before in people who were receiving instructions they had been waiting for. Recognition, and underneath recognition, the particular stillness of someone told to want what they already want, and finding the experience subtly diminishing. Draco looked up and found Harry watching. His face rearranged itself without visible effort. "From my father," he said. "I know," Harry said. Draco's jaw moved. He picked up his pumpkin juice. Later, in the dormitory, Draco read the letter a third time. His father had heard about the Greengrass arrangement and had found it useful, had found Harry Potter interesting as a connection. The phrasing was directive rather than advisory. Draco should advance this relationship, continue to be useful. His father was telling him to do what he had already been doing. This should have felt like confirmation. Instead, it felt, briefly, in the empty room, like being a piece on a board he had believed he was moving himself. He sealed this away. He was his father's son. He would do what was useful. He went to potions. The escalated approach arrived in the form of Draco appearing at Harry's side on Thursday evening and saying, "There are things you should know about this house." Harry closed his book. He had learned in 5 months of Slytherin that Draco's preambles were usually exactly as long as his actual point, and that the best thing was to wait. Draco talked for the better part of an hour. He talked about the older students, which 5th years ran which social currents, which 7th years the other houses deferred to, and why. He talked about the unwritten rules, that certain conflicts in Slytherin were never made visible, that the house's value to its members was contingent on appearing unified. He talked about his father's position on the board of governors, with the specificity of someone who had been raised to understand that name and structure were the same thing. He mentioned his mother once, briefly, and moved on. Harry listened. He had developed a good ear for the parts of what Draco said that Draco genuinely believed, versus the parts installed there by someone else. The ratio had been shifting. Tonight it was different again. The performance thinner than usual. And sometimes, when Draco forgot he was executing something, he was funny. He said, "Flint operates on the theory that volume is a substitute for strategy, which is why we lost to Hufflepuff in 1989. He said it with the dry precision of someone who has studied a failure and found it instructive. Harry had a response to this that was sharp and specific and would have made them both laugh, and he kept it behind his teeth. He could not yet tell if there was a person in there, underneath the architecture of the Alliance, or if the architecture went all the way down. He supposed it was worth finding out. Pansy Parkinson had been watching all of this with the attention of someone keeping score in a game they hadn't been invited to play. Harry had noticed her noticing. In mid-February she made her move, which was, he discovered, a remarkably small one. She said something to Daphne as they passed in the corridor. He caught only the end of it, about what happens to arrangements that are built on convenience rather than substance. She said it pleasantly. She had a gift for pleasantness that contained a weapon only if you knew exactly where to look. Daphne did not react. She had Blaise Zabini beside her, who was watching Pansy with the cool disinterest of someone who considered the whole conversation beneath his energy expenditure, which itself communicated something. Harry filed this. Later, in the common room. What did Pansy mean? Daphne looked up from her book. Nothing. That didn't look like nothing. The appearance of nothing is often its own strategy, she said, and went back to reading. He looked at her profile, the clean line of it, the composure that had been there since the first night, that he had spent 5 months learning to read around the edges of. He said, "If it involves you, it's my concern." He had not constructed that sentence. It arrived already finished. He heard it after he had said it. Daphne was still for exactly 1 beat. Then she turned a page. She did not say anything. She had the quality, which he had come to recognize as particular to her, of receiving information and filing it somewhere he couldn't see. He went back to his own work. He did not try to unsay it. The centerpiece of February arrived quietly, without announcing itself as anything. A Tuesday evening, the common room nearly empty, Crabbe and Goyle sleeping in their respective chairs with the uncomplicated thoroughness of people who have no unresolved questions. Draco had gone to the dormitory an hour ago. The fire was low. The black lake pressed its darkness against the windows, no stars visible from this depth, only the shifting weight of cold water. Harry was working through the potions assignment at the table near the window. Daphne was across from him, 3 books arranged in that deliberate order she kept, quill moving at the precise pace she always worked. At some point, without commenting on it, she moved the lamp slightly to the left, so the light fell better on his parchment. He had been squinting. He had not said so. He said after some time, "Snape assigned 14 inches on the uses of hellebore. Hellebore has 4 uses." Daphne said, 14 inches is the assignment. You will write 14 inches. I could write each use in 3 inches and cite the remaining 2 inches as evidence of the plant's specificity. Something moved in her face. It was small and very quick and was nearly almost a laugh. Harry looked back at his parchment. He was aware of the temperature of the room. They worked. The fire ticked lower. Outside the window, the lake went darker, by increments, as whatever was moving in the deep water moved further from the glass. Neither of them noted this as a reason to leave. He asked her, at some point, about a charm they had covered in their second week of term that he hadn't needed since, and had accordingly mostly forgotten. She answered without looking up from her own work, precisely in the exact number of words required. He wrote it down. She went back to reading. This was, he had come to understand, Daphne's version of ease. Not warmth as performed warmth, but the absence of management, the dropping of the navigational quality she applied to most interactions. She was not evaluating him right now. She was just here. He had grown up in houses where simply being present in a room meant being assessed. He had not known, before September, that rooms could feel different. When she closed her last book, she said, standing, "You're not terrible at this." She meant the potions assignment. He was reasonably certain she meant the potions assignment. He decided to believe, for the walk back to the dormitory and the 10 minutes before he fell asleep, that she might have meant something slightly larger. He did not say so. He wrote the letter to Hermione Granger on a Wednesday, using the word sensation where he would have otherwise used pain, a sensation above his right eye during certain classes that he could not attribute to any obvious cause, not found in the first-year curriculum. He wrote, "I'm not asking for your conclusions. I'm asking for the right place to look." She wrote back on Saturday. Her letter cited 4 separate texts. She had not arrived at the answer, but she had mapped the conceptual territory with the efficiency of someone who considers a partial map significantly better than no map, which it was. He put the letter in the box with Dumbledore's letter and the photograph, and the things he kept that he wasn't ready to lose. He went to his next defense class with a clearer idea of what he was looking for, and Quirrell adjusted his turban and did not look at Harry, and Harry did not let his face do anything about the way his scar spiked when he entered the room. He was getting better at not letting his face do things. The third-floor corridor had a smell that the others didn't. Most of Hogwarts smelled of old stone and wood smoke, and, in the lower levels, the particular cold mineral quality of deep water. The third floor smelled of those things too, and then, from a certain point east of the staircase, something else, something that the back of Harry's skull recognized before the rest of him did. A pressure, a proximity to something. He had been here twice before, briefly, in February. Tonight he walked it alone. The corridor was empty at this hour. The torches were spaced further apart onto this floor, whether by design or neglect, and the spaces between them were longer and darker than elsewhere. Harry kept his pace steady. He had learned at 4 Privet Drive that walking with visible uncertainty was worse than walking without any. His scar began its low ache around the 3rd torch from the staircase. Not the spiked pain of the Dada classroom. This was duller, sustained, the way a bruise feels when you press it. He pressed 2 fingers against his forehead and kept moving. He went as far as the door at the end. It was a large door, heavier looking than the others, and he stood in front of it long enough to clock that it was the specific kind of locked that meant someone had put effort into locking it, and that the ache in his scar while he stood here was the same quality as the ache in the Dada classroom, which was the same quality he had felt once, walking past Quirrell in the 2nd floor corridor at close range, the same source, different distance. He did not touch the door. He stood there for 2 minutes and felt what he felt, and then walked back. Ron was in the corridor. He was at the top of the 3rd floor staircase, with his arms crossed, and the expression he wore when he had been worrying about something, and had arrived at the point past which worry converts to frustration. He was taller than Harry now. He had been taller than Harry since November, which Harry found mildly irritating, and would never say so. And his red hair was lit orange by the nearest torch, and he had the look of someone who had been waiting for a specific amount of time, and found it excessive. "Harry," he said, with the restraint of someone selecting a tone. "Ron?" "3rd floor," Ron said. Harry didn't say anything. "I've heard 3rd years talking about what's up here," Ron said. "What's forbidden about it? They don't know specifically, but they know it's not nothing." He dropped his arms. "What are you doing?" "Nothing yet," Harry said. "You were about to do something." Harry looked at him. Ron had always had this quality, the ability to know, not the calculating knowledge of Draco, who watched for patterns and mapped them. This was different, simpler, more direct. Ron simply looked at Harry and knew, the way he knew which move on a chessboard was the one that mattered. He had been right. "Come to Gryffindor Tower," Ron said, the sharpness dropping out of his voice. "Tell us what you know. Hermione's been asking questions, too, between the 3 of us." Harry stood in the corridor and thought about this. The version of the year in which he was in Gryffindor had a different shape entirely. This investigation, a communal thing. Ron at close range, Hermione at close range. He could feel the weight of that road. It had been available at the beginning. "I'll tell you if I find anything real," Harry said. "I mean that." Ron looked at him for a long moment. He did not say fine. He did not say he understood. He said, "Don't get expelled," which was Ron's way of saying he was going to let it go, and was not happy about it. Harry walked down the corridor. He felt Ron watching him until the stairs cut the sight line. Draco was waiting at the bottom. He was leaning against the wall at the 2nd floor landing in the specific posture of someone who had calculated where to stand so the encounter would look incidental. Harry stopped on the last step. "3rd floor," Draco said. Harry began to consider whether the entire castle had been watching him. "I've been watching you since November," Draco said, without preamble, which answered the question. "You've been on that floor 4 times. The frequency is increasing." He pushed off the wall and came level with Harry. He was not performing the friendship of the Thursday evenings. He was doing the other thing, the version of Draco that came from the letter. "If you do something conspicuous up there," Draco said, "it brings teachers. If it brings teachers, it brings Dumbledore. If it brings Dumbledore, he asks questions about which students have been on the 3rd floor and why, and the answer that comes back involves a Slytherin, and that means questions about the house. It means my father hearing about it." He paused, In this house we do not draw attention. We do not run toward things without knowing what they are first. Harry listened to this in its entirety. He said, "What if it's something that matters?" Draco looked at him. His voice was even. "Everything matters to someone. That's why you choose carefully what you act on." He straightened the cuff of his robe. "I am not telling you to stop. I am telling you not to be visible about it." He walked away. Harry stood in the stairwell and thought about the gap between the warning Draco had delivered and the brief, almost imperceptible moment before the strategy had clicked back into place. He stored both. He told Daphne that night. He had not planned when to do it. He had not planned it at all. It happened the way certain decisions happen when you have been carrying something long enough that putting it down becomes easier than continuing to hold it. The common room was quiet, the fire lower than usual, the lake outside the windows a deep and unreadable black. She was in her chair near the window with a book she had not turned a page of in 15 minutes, which he had noted without saying so. He had been on the opposite sofa with his own book since 9 o'clock, also not reading it. He said, "My scar hurts when I'm near the defense professor." She looked up. "It's been happening since the first class in October," he said. "It happens on the 3rd floor. Same quality. I think it's the same source." He watched her face. She was listening in the focused way she listened, the full weight of her attention on him without performing what that weight meant. "I don't know what's in that corridor. I know something is. I know Quirrell is connected to it somehow." He paused. "I don't know what to do about it." Silence. The fire. The lake behind the windows, deep and dark. She said, "What do you want to do?" "I want to know what's in there." She looked at him for a moment, with those steady grey eyes that gave nothing easily, and then she said, "Then we find out what's in there." He noticed the word. He turned it over quietly, in the space behind his face, where he kept the things he was still working out what to do with. She had said "we" without construction, without the negotiating quality of someone extending an offer and waiting to see if it was accepted. She had said it the way you say a fact, a thing already true that required no confirmation. He had spent 7 months in this house, learning the difference between people who included you and people who made you useful. This had been something else. He was not sure yet what to do with that distinction. He did not point out the word. He said, "All right." She went back to her book. He looked out at the dark water for a long time. Quirrell took a different route to the staff room on Thursdays now. He had not done this in October, had not done it in November or December, or through the cold of January, when the castle corridors were straightforward and his route was the most direct one. He had begun, in the 3rd week of February, to take the longer path that circled back through the 2nd floor, adding 4 minutes to a 7-minute walk, because the direct route brought him within 6 feet of Harry Potter's usual path between the dungeon stairs and the library, and proximity to Harry Potter had begun to produce a sensation that was difficult to manage in public. The thing inside his head had noticed the boy, had been noticing him since the first lesson, with an intensity that Quirrell could feel as distinct from his own, the way you feel the shape of a thing pressing from inside a container. The boy was watching him. He adjusted his turban in a corridor, and found his hands were shaking, and pressed them flat against his thighs, and kept walking. He took the long route. He did not look back at the 3rd floor as he passed it. He thought, soon. Not his own thought. He pressed it back and went to the staff room, and sat very still and thought about nothing for a long time. It did not entirely work. The note arrived on a Monday, written in Snape's handwriting, which was precise and slightly angular, and communicated even in administrative correspondence that the writer had no time to waste on warmth. It said, "Mr. Potter will report to the potions office at 7 o'clock this evening." It did not say, "Please." Harry went at 7. The potions office was in the lowest part of the dungeons, further down than the common room, and the air there had a quality the rest of the castle didn't. Something cold and chemical and dense, with whatever had been stored and simmered in those rooms for years. Harry knocked. The door opened. The office was narrow, stone-walled, and smelled of dried ingredients and preserved things. The shelves held jars in pale fluid, some identifiable, some not. And Snape sat behind his desk with the stillness of someone who had arranged himself in a position of deliberate calm and was holding it. "Sit," he said. Harry sat. "You have been observed near the third-floor corridor," Snape said, "on 4 separate occasions." Harry said nothing. "The third-floor corridor is restricted. Dumbledore established this restriction at the beginning of term and was explicit about its seriousness." Snape's voice was measured. It had the quality, Harry had noticed, of someone who had calibrated it to deliver information without emotional content, not because there was none, but because he had decided it was irrelevant. "You have been on that floor. You have been near the door at its eastern end. On one occasion you were observed to stand in front of that door for an estimated 2 minutes. "Who observed me?" Harry said. Snape's expression did not change. "That is not the question you should be asking." Harry waited. "The question you should be asking," Snape said, "is why a Slytherin student, whose house's first principle is not heroism but effectiveness, would expose himself by walking the same restricted corridor 4 times. Each subsequent visit is a greater risk than the one before. It is also a greater departure from the qualities the Sorting Hat identified in you." He paused. "You are not stupid. Therefore this approach is not strategy. What is it?" Harry looked at the jar nearest to him on the desk, something coiled in pale fluid, with what appeared to be a secondary spine. He looked at it and thought about the answer. He said, "Something is wrong with that corridor. I can feel it." "You can feel it," Snape repeated. His voice gave nothing away about what he thought of this. "My scar," Harry said, "when I'm near that part of the castle. When I'm near Quirrell." The silence lasted 3 seconds. Snape's expression did not change, but something in the room shifted in the way rooms shift when a thing has been said that cannot be unsaid. "Reckless investigation of restricted areas," Snape said, "is beneath a Slytherin. It attracts attention. It produces questions that your house, and your head of house, would prefer not to answer on your behalf." He held Harry's gaze. "This must stop." Harry heard what he said. He heard, underneath what he said, something that was not in the words, a quality in the restraint itself that told him Snape knew exactly what was in that corridor and had very specific reasons for wanting Harry away from it. He stored this. He looked at his hands. He said, "Did she know you were watching out for her?" The silence was different now. Longer. He had not planned to say it here. It had been in him since the conversation with Dumbledore in January, the partial answer, they were friends, once, a long time ago. And in him since October, since the first time he had noticed Snape's gaze spending a fraction too long on his face, before correcting. He had not been able to construct the question cleanly. It arrived in pieces. His mother, and Snape, and what it meant to care about a person you could not protect. "My mother," Harry said, in case it needed clarification. "Did she know?" Snape was very still. "That," Snape said, after a moment that cost something, "is not a relevant question." His voice was even. It was professionally even in a way that was different from the professional evenness of the rest of the conversation, and Harry heard the difference. "I think it is," Harry said. He stood. "I'll stop going to the 3rd floor." He picked up his bag. "Thank you for the warning, Professor." He left. Behind him, the office door closed. In the silence of the room, Snape sat very still. He had spent 10 years preparing for Harry Potter. He had prepared the armor, contempt, distance, the wall he had built and maintained year by year in the place grief had been. He had been ready for James Potter's arrogance on a boy the world had made into a legend. He had not been ready for this. James's face, with Lily's eyes in Slytherin robes, asking not about his father, but about his mother, and not about her sacrifice or her love, the words everyone used, but about whether she had known, whether she had been seen, the way the people who loved you were supposed to see you, before she was gone. He did not allow himself sentiment. He had rules about this, and he did not revisit their origins. He allowed himself, in the empty office, to sit still for a moment. That was the total of the acknowledgement. Then he pulled the 3rd-year parchments toward him and began to mark. And he was very good at marking, and he did not stop until the lamp ran low. The evening settled over the common room by degrees. It was quiet by 9, quieter than usual, which was a thing Harry had noticed happened in April, when the older students began retreating to their dormitories with revision timetables, and the room thinned from the inside out. Draco had gone up an hour ago, Crabbe and Goyle before that. The greenish light from the black lake pressed steadily against the windows in the way it always did, and the fire was down to coals, and Harry was in the chair nearest the window not doing anything. This was unusual. Since September he had not simply sat. He had been doing things continuously, revising, observing, constructing alliances, learning the rules of this house and the grammar of the people in it, proving, the hat's word, returned to him regularly, to everyone, including himself, that the placement had been right. He had not stopped. He stopped now. He was tired in a specific and honest way, and the conversation in Snape's office was still in him, and he looked out at the dark water and let everything go quiet. Daphne was reading in her chair across the room. She had been reading for 2 hours. He had been not reading for 40 minutes, and she had not commented on this, which was one of the things about her that he had come to rely on without formally cataloguing it. The absence of commentary. She did not fill silence with management. He said, without planning it, "Do you like this? Being here?" She lowered her book. He said, "Hogwarts, Slytherin, this." He did not specify further. He meant the accumulated weight of this particular year, which had been nothing like what he had expected from the train, from the books, from any of the framings anyone had given him. She said, "I don't know yet." He said, "Neither do I." They sat with this. The ring on his finger caught the low firelight. It had always been there, in every version of every room he had sat in since September, and he had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing anything that has become a fact of yourself. She had never asked him to take it off. He had never considered taking it off. She went back to her book after a while. He stayed in the chair and looked at the lake and thought, once, briefly, this is not what Hagrid described. Then he didn't think anything in particular, which was rare and restoring, and the fire went lower. He was still there when she finally went to bed. She said good night in the way she said most things, precisely without performance, and he said good night back, and she went. He stayed for another 20 minutes in the underwater light of the lake, in the quiet room that was now entirely his, and looked at the dark water moving slowly outside the glass. For the first time since the beginning of September, he was not constructing anything, not reading the room, not calculating the next move. He was just here. It was a surprisingly large thing, just being here. In the tower above, Dumbledore sat without a lamp. He did not need one to know Harry was in the common room, not near the 3rd floor, that the evening had settled. He exhaled something that was not quite relief. He had not allowed himself relief since Godric's Hollow, but was in the neighbourhood. He knew what was coming. The stone. Quirrell. He did not know the night, or with whom Harry would go. He sat with the not knowing. He permitted himself one thought. The boy has had one quiet evening. That is enough for tonight. He told her at 10 o'clock when the common room had emptied. He did not build to it. He said, "Tonight. Quirrell is going for whatever is in that corridor." She looked up from her book. He said, "Dumbledore is away from the school. If he goes for it tonight, and we're not there." He stopped. He did not have a complete sentence for what happened after that, because what happened after that was a thing he had been not thinking about for weeks. Daphne set her book down. She looked at him with the grey-eyed attention she gave to problems that required the whole of her. She said, "Do you know what is between us and it?" "Not entirely." She stood. "Then we go prepared for anything." She said it without the quality of bravery, not the Gryffindor sense of it, the rushing toward, the raising of the heart. The Slytherin sense, preparation, assessment, the calculation of acceptable risk, and the decision to proceed anyway. She went to get her wand. Harry already had his. They went at 10:30, when the castle was thoroughly dark. The door at the 3rd floor corridor was locked. It was not locked for long. Behind it was a chamber that smelled of animal and stone and something else. The deep, organic smell of a creature that ate meat and didn't mind. And in the center of it, the 3-headed dog was asleep on the floor, all 3 heads slack, the enormous chest rising and falling in the particular rhythm of something that had been lulled. A small harp in the corner was winding down, its strings still faintly vibrating. Quirrell had been here first. Daphne looked at the trap-door beneath one vast paw. She looked at Harry. They moved together. The trap-door opened, and the cold rose up and they dropped. The devil's snare reached for them before their feet touched the floor. A mass of it, tendrils already moving with the purposeful slowness of a plant that had caught things before and found them difficult. Harry had read about it, and had no particular plan beyond this. Daphne had read about it, and had the plan. She said, "Stop struggling. Let it take your weight." And Harry stilled by an act of will that took all of the will he currently had, and she cast a jet of blue flame, and the plant recoiled from both of them, and they dropped into the chamber below. Harry breathed for a moment. Daphne was already moving. The next chamber was enormous and dark and full of keys. They were winged keys, hundreds of them, swooping through the darkness. A broomstick stood against the far wall below a locked door. Daphne stepped back without a word, and Harry took the broomstick and went up. He found the right key in under a minute, bent wing, trying to escape. And he was fast in a way that felt tonight almost like anger. He caught it. The door opened. The chess pieces were waiting on the other side, life-size, stone, arranged with the calm patience of pieces that had been waiting for players for a long time, and found the waiting untroubling. Daphne walked into the room ahead of Harry and looked at the board for 30 seconds. The whole board, every piece, with the focused quiet she brought to everything that required thought. And then she began. She did not explain her moves. She made them. Harry followed her direction, stood where she placed him, moved when she told him to move, and understood about 4 moves in that she was playing to get them through with the minimum damage to themselves, and was succeeding at it. And he stored this the way he stored everything about her, and said nothing, The pieces that fell badly. They did not fall on Harry or on Daphne. The door on the far side opened. The next chamber held a troll laid flat on the stone floor, insensible, a large knot on the side of its head. Quirrell's work. They stepped over it and moved quickly to the door at the far end, and neither of them looked at it closely, and they went through. The potions chamber was quiet and purple-tinged, the air slightly smoky. 7 bottles arranged on a table between 2 fires, a roll of parchment. Daphne read the parchment, and Harry watched her read it, and understood, from the quality of her stillness, that it was a logic puzzle, and that she was already solving it. She took 3 minutes. She worked the parchment with the deliberate speed of someone who will not be hurried, even when they want to be. Then she looked up. 1 bottle goes forward, she said. Her voice was even. 1 bottle goes back. She looked at him. There is only enough for 1 person to go forward. Harry had known this was coming, in the way you know things that you have been avoiding knowing. He held out his hand. Daphne stood with the forward bottle for a moment that was very still. She was not a hero. She had known this about herself with precision. She was someone who assessed risk and made decisions in alignment with her interests, and this had been an interest since September. Harry Potter in Slytherin, the political calculus that had made sense on a platform in London, and had become, over 8 months, something she had no clean word for. She had gone through a 3-headed dog and a strangling plant, and a chess game with stone pieces as large as adults. And now she was going to hand this bottle to a boy who was 11 years old. She handed him the bottle. She said, "Come back." Not, "I believe in you." Not, "You can do this." Just, "Come back." It was the most honest thing she had said to him since September, and she knew he heard it. Harry drank the forward bottle and stepped through the black fire. The final chamber was cold. The mirror stood at the far end, as tall as Harry remembered, the gold of its frame catching the ambient light of the room. His scar was a low throb. He walked toward the mirror and stood in front of it. He saw his parents, James with his untidy hair and his glasses, and Lily with the green eyes that Harry had spent 11 years looking at in windows and pools and any reflective surface that would give him something. They were standing behind him in the mirror, the way they had always stood, with the ease of people who had always been there, who expected to go on being there. He looked at his father's face, which was his face, and then at his mother's, which had his eyes, and he stood still for a long time. Then he looked at the edge. The figure at the edge of the image was the one he had looked away from at Christmas, which he had been not looking at steadily since December. He looked at it now, properly, with the specific intention of seeing it clearly. It was Daphne, standing where she always stood when they were in the same room, which was near him, close enough that the proximity had its own language. Her face in the mirror was the face she showed only when she did not know he was looking, the one she had been wearing in the storage room at Christmas before she heard him in the doorway and put it away. He looked at it for one clear, unhurried moment. He thought, "I want to find it. I do not want to use it. I want to bring it back. I want things to stay the way they are right now, tonight, her at the other end of that chamber, saying, 'Come back.' And that specific wanting is so precise, I can feel it like a physical thing." Something dropped into his pocket. He reached in and closed his fingers around it, and he did not look at it, because behind him, the door had opened. Quirrell came in. He looked different here, below the school, away from the performance of the classroom, more direct, more certain. The trembling was gone. He walked to the mirror and stood looking at it. and then looked at Harry with eyes that had a quality Harry had not seen in them before. Clarity, and behind the clarity, something that was not Quirrell. He said, "Give it to me." His voice cracked on the last word, and then the voice that came from him next was not his. Lower, sibilant, coming from a different direction, and Quirrell reached up and unwound his turban, and turned around, and Harry's scar tore open. The face on the back of Quirrell's head was less than a face. Sunken, barely there, existing at the far end of what a face could be and still be a face. It looked at Harry with the red-eyed regard of something that had been waiting for a long time and did not have patience left. "The stone," it said. Harry's hand was in his pocket. Quirrell turned, lurching, and grabbed Harry's wrist. And then Quirrell screamed. His hands were blistering where they touched Harry's skin. Not burning from outside, burning from the contact itself, the way two things burn when they cannot coexist and one of them is older. Harry did not understand what was happening. He only knew that Quirrell's grip was loosening, and the thing behind Quirrell's eyes was screaming too now, and the pain in Harry's scar was absolute and total, and there was nothing in the world but it. He held on. The last thing he heard, before the white swallowed everything, was the stone still in his pocket. He woke to a light that was not greenish. It took him a moment to understand this. 9 months of the dungeon had calibrated him to a particular quality of light, the cold aquatic glow of the black lake through stone windows. And this light was white and clean and came from ordinary windows with ordinary sky behind them. The hospital wing. He lay still and gathered the facts. He was alive. His hands were bandaged. The stone was not in his pocket. He reached in anyway. Nothing. He lay back. The ring was still on his finger. He looked at it for a while. The school matron came, checked the bandages, told him in crisp, competent terms that he would be fine and that he had been unconscious for 3 days, and left. He looked at the ceiling. He thought about the mirror and what he had seen in it, and what had dropped into his hand. And he thought about the fire, and Quirrell's hands blistering, and the thing on the back of Quirrell's head that had looked at him with red eyes, and wanted the stone, and was now, apparently, gone. He lay still. The light was white. He was alive. Dumbledore came in the afternoon. He sat in the chair beside the bed with the deliberate ease of someone who is making themselves available and not performing their authority. He told Harry the truth in the order Harry needed it. What had been under the 3rd floor. The Philosopher's Stone, and what it did, and why it had been at Hogwarts, moved from Gringotts in July, from a vault that had been broken into, hidden under protective enchantments. It had now been destroyed. Harry asked, "And the Professor?" "Gone," Dumbledore said. Quietly. He did not offer grief or celebration. He placed the word where it belonged and moved on. He folded his hands. "You went into that corridor without knowing what you would find." "I had a good reason to." "You had a brave reason," Dumbledore said, "and a resourceful one, and an ambitious one." He paused for a moment. "I am beginning to think the hat was, as always, entirely correct." He did not say what else Harry had used in that chamber, or name the quality of it. He let the space exist. He stood at the door on his way out, and said, as he had said once before, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Then he was gone, and the room was quiet, and Harry lay in the white light and thought about choices. Ron came the next morning with Hermione, the two of them side by side, with the slight awkwardness of people who do not yet know each other well enough to be comfortable and are trying to be for his sake. Harry had noticed since October that Ron and Hermione occupied parallel, but not shared space in his life. Without him in Gryffindor, the event that might have made them a unit had not happened. He could feel the shape of its absence, and it was not his to fix. Ron looked at him with the expression he wore when he had been frightened and was working hard not to say so. He said, "You went down there alone?" "Not alone," Harry said. Ron looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at her hands. Then Ron looked back at Harry and understood what Harry meant, which was not Hermione. There was a beat. Ron said, Is it going well then? With her?" Harry considered the question honestly. He thought about the common room, and the lake, and the chess pieces, and the bottle she had pressed into his hand, and the 2 words she had said. He said, "I don't know yet," Ron said. "That's usually how it starts." It was the warmest and most uncomplicated thing anyone had said to Harry in weeks, and it landed accordingly. They talked for 15 minutes about the term, about Quidditch, about examinations that had happened 3 days ago, and which Harry had somehow sat. Hermione had opinions about examination technique. It was comfortable in the way that things are comfortable when they are real and bounded simultaneously. At the door, Hermione turned back and said to both of them, "You should write more often." Then she went out, and Ron followed, and the room was quiet again. Snape came last among the unexpected visitors. He came at 7 in the evening, when the light through the windows was going gold, and he stood at the foot of the bed and looked at Harry for a moment without preamble. He said, "You used the mirror correctly." "How do you know what the mirror showed me?" "Because you are alive," Snape said, "and the stone is gone." Harry thought about this. It was true. The stone only came to the person who wanted to find it and not use it, and he had wanted precisely that, and it had worked, and he was alive. He said, "I saw my parents." Snape was still. He said nothing. Harry looked at his bandaged hands. He said, "I saw her." He meant his mother. He said it carefully. Something moved across Snape's face and was gone. He said, "I know." He turned to leave. Harry said, "She taught you something about this, didn't she? The love. The thing that burned him when he touched me." He was guessing in real time from a year of accumulated attention. The extra fraction of a look in potions, the Dumbledore answer in January, the corridor in January, and Snape walking away. "You know what it is." Snape stopped at the foot of the bed. He did not turn around. He said very quietly, "Yes." Then he left. Harry lay in the gold evening light and thought about a man who had spent 32 years being unable to say it directly and had just said it in 1 syllable. He looked at his hands. Daphne came at 8. She sat in the chair beside the bed, the same chair, Harry thought, that had held Dumbledore and Ron and Hermione, and briefly but notably Snape, and she looked at him with the grey-eyed attention that had been the first thing he had catalogued about her 9 months ago in a dungeon dormitory, before he understood that the attention was not strategy, but simply how she looked at things she was thinking carefully about. She said, "The Greengrass family will want to discuss what happened." He looked at her. She was managing it, even now, even here, with the ring on his finger and the bandages on his hands, and 9 months of the specific, shared weight of whatever it was they had built. She was managing the arrangement, maintaining the frame, because that was the only language she had been given for it. He understood this. He did not hold it against her. He looked at the ring. It had been on his finger since the sorting. He had never decided to keep it. He had simply never taken it off, and there was a kind of decision in that. One day at a time, since September. He said, "I know." She said, "You don't have to. If you want out of the arrangement, the family will." He said, "I don't want out." The room was quiet. Outside, the sky was doing the long, slow gold of a June evening. He had chosen this: Slytherin, the ring, the dungeon, and its greenish light, and the chess games, and the library, and the things she had said in the dark corridor under the school with one bottle between them. Chosen it at the beginning, and was choosing it again now, with full knowledge of what it cost and what it gave. The weight of it was not nothing. It was the right weight. Daphne was quiet for a while. She said, "All right." That was all. It was enough. On the last day of term, Harry went down to the lake. The summer light was a different colour from any light inside the castle. Not cold, not greenish, not candlelit or torchlit. Just open sky over open water. The black lake going blue where it had always gone black, and the Scottish hills pale in the distance. He stood at the edge and looked at it. Daphne stood beside him. The ring caught the light. The bloody baron drifted past at a distance along the shore, chains trailing in silence, not looking at them. Harry watched him go. He thought about the ghost's story, the murder and the remorse, the self-inflicted punishment carried for centuries. And then he thought about what had been in his hand in the mirror chamber, and the thing that had burned a possessed man's skin and could not be used wrongly because it had no wrong use. He did not know the name for it yet. He was 11 years old, and he had been told he was brave, resourceful, ambitious. He had been told the hat was correct. He had not yet been told the last thing, the thing underneath all the other things, the quality his mother had given him, and that a man in a corridor had confirmed in one syllable. But he could feel it in his hands where it had burned, and in the mirror where it had shown him what he wanted, and in his pocket where the stone had dropped without being taken. He would learn the word. He looked at the lake. He looked at Daphne. She was watching the water with the particular quality of presence she carried, which was not performing anything, which was just her, here in the summer light. He said nothing. Neither did she. The baron had passed. The lake was still. He had 9 months behind him.